Hey there, it's Lyndon Hold'em and Hold'em Realty Group, and for 20 plus years, I've been helping buyers, sellers, and investors make profitable decisions here in the Las Vegas Valley as it relates to real estate. And so I'm starting a new series today, and this is prompted by a 24-year-old son who's a Gen Zer, asked me this last weekend. He said, "Dad, when's the best time for me to purchase a home?" And he had some questions around that. He said, "How do I go about purchasing a home here in the near future, within the next year? What are the things that I need to be thinking about? What are the things I need to be planning for? How do they relate to money?" and so on. And so I'm really glad he asked that question because it prompted me to do this. And so I'm going to record several videos so that you guys can know, especially if you're a Gen Zer, if you're a first-time home buyer, it's relevant, but especially I'm going to target as much as possible. I'm in my 50s, so I can't talk all the Gen Z language and lingo, but I will do my best, I promise. And so, and I just know that I'm sharing this video like I was talking to my own son, because I am. And so hopefully you'll be able to get some value from this. So the first question that we wanted to answer is this: how much money do you actually need to buy a home? I mean, that's a key question, right? I mean, you're going, man, I mean, it's funny. I've had kids ask me, think that it was crazy high numbers sometimes. And sometimes first-time home buyers just don't know. And what you don't know. And even with the internet and everything, it can be very confusing. As my son said, it's the understanding how the math works and what's expected, and there's so much different information anymore that you really don't know what is the bottom line. And so I'm gonna try to break it down. It's probably one of my little bit longer videos, but we're gonna do it in one take, and we're gonna go over. And so I'm gonna be looking over here, and I apologize if I'm not looking at your eyes and talking about stuff, but I'm gonna hopefully you can read my chicken scratch, and maybe we'll add some more stuff at another time, but here we go. So first and foremost, when you purchase a home, I'm going to use a $300,000 price as our reference point. And in most areas of the country, you can buy a pretty nice home for $300,000 or less. In some areas of the country, you can buy a good starter home for maybe as little as $100,000, especially if it's a really small place or a condo or a townhouse. But for the most part, if depending on where you live, as always, but let's just use $300,000. I know that you could purchase something in the Vegas area for $300,000. Our median price as of today, right now, is around $465,000, but that's for a single family home. And yes, if it's a median price, obviously there's homes that can be purchased below that price. And so, if you're starting out, you just want a 2-bedroom home or a smaller home or a condo or a small townhouse or whatever, you can definitely get into the real estate market and own your home in the $300,000 range or less in almost anywhere in the U.S. And so here we go. So here it is. So using $300,000 as the price point. First of all, keep in mind that the loan, I'm making an assumption here beyond the $300,000 that you're probably not buying cash. And so this whole conversation is going to be based on assuming that you are using a mortgage loan to purchase the house. And so the first question is, so how much money do you actually need? And so first of all, there's two different columns that I've used. One is the cost of actually the property that relate directly to the cost of buying the property, and I hope that makes sense. And then there are certain costs that are specific just to getting a loan. And so if you don't know, but whenever you get any loan, there's going to be costs of getting that loan. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to pay them all the time, and some loan costs can be included in the loan, whether it's a mortgage loan or other types of loans. But so for today, I'm going to tell you some of the costs, then I'm going to also share with you what you might actually have to come out of pocket or not. And so I'll give you the end of the video first. So the short answer is, if you're purchasing a home, you most likely, in most scenarios, you're going to need to have somewhere between 5 and 7% of the purchase price of that property. And so if you're purchasing a $300,000 house, 7% would be 21,000. 5% would have obviously be 15,000. So somewhere in that 15 to 20, 21,000 range is probably going to be your target. Now there are caveats to that. I mean, there's first-time buyer assistance. If you're a veteran, if you've served in the armed forces, then there's 0% down VA loans, and a lot of the costs can be included. And so you can actually buy a home as a veteran if you've served in the services, in the armed services for zero. I mean, you can literally buy a home with zero money out of pocket, including the costs and loans and so on. Now, there are costs, but it's just you don't have to come out of pocket for it. There are also, if you're doing an FHA loan, which is a government-backed loan, insured loan, I should say. And there's certainly ways to buy it with less, but for this purpose, just keep that in mind. And you always have to, I guess I'll say it this way, is you really need to have a professional, both a professional lender that you know you can trust and a professional agent like myself that can guide you through the process. And so it's super important that you have a professional that you know and trust and that is knowledgeable that can guide you through, because there's so many different options, excuse me, and ways you can do it. Excuse me. So let's break this down real quick. So first of all, the property costs alone. So whenever you go to buy a property, when you decide on the property and say, yes, I want to purchase it, you have to put some earnest money down in almost every situation. And so most sellers are going to be looking for about 1%, at least that's what's common here in our Vegas market, about 1%. So on a $300,000 property, that means you're going to need $3,000 in cash that you put into escrow to show the seller that you're serious about buying the house. And that money, it's not, if you backed out of the deal based on contingencies and depending on the contracts, how the contract's written, you could get that money back. But it does secure it for the seller, meaning that if you went through the process and on the last day when you're supposed to be closing escrow, closing the loan and buying the house, then you suddenly decide, change your mind and back out. Well, yeah, then that money is at risk. And so there's some scenarios, and once again, that needs to be explained to you depending on how the real estate contract's written. But for the most part, it's money. It goes towards the purchase of the house. It's not just in addition to what the $300,000 you're paying for the house. It's earnest money, and it does get credited to the purchase, and also as part of your down payment when you purchase that house at closing. And so earnest money, normally about 1%. Down payment. Now that can vary greatly too. As we said a bit ago, a veteran loan, a VA loan, can be 0% down. An FHA loan, which is very common for first-time home buyers, they normally want to see a 3.5% down payment, which a 3.5, do the math, 3.5% of 300,000. Obviously, you're looking at 10,500, I believe, if I did the math right in my head. So that's your down payment. So it can be anywhere from 0 to 5%. Even if you're not doing an FHA loan, a conventional loan, these days there's a lot of loan options. There's 3% conventional. Every once in a while, there'll even be a lower percent than that. There's also 5% down conventional loans. There's 10% down conventional loans. But you can usually purchase a home for somewhere between 3.5% and 5% down, even without any assistance from the seller, which we'll talk about in a minute. And so the next thing to be aware of, the thing that will sometimes catch you and surprise you, is when you go to close escrow to purchase a house, there's some costs that are prepaid. So for example, your home, your property insurance, your casualty insurance that you purchase to protect you in case, let's say, the house burned down. You don't want to have a $300,000 house and suddenly you have nothing but ashes, and you still owe $300,000. And you have zero, and you have a $300,000 problem. And so that's why insurance is important. Plus, a mortgage lender is going to require you to have insurance for that very reason, because they don't want to lose the asset that they're giving you a loan on. And so there will be some prepaids, meaning that the insurance need to be prepaid for the first 12 months or for a period of time. Taxes sometimes need to be prepaid for part of the time. There's other homeowner association fees. Sometimes there's some prepayments and so on. And so a lot of those costs aren't true costs. You're just basically pre-funding them that you're going to need to pay at some other point. So you do need to have a little bit of a cash cushion, though, because now those monies, while it's not a long-term, meaning you'll get the credit of it once you're in the house and you won't have to pay it later, but there are some costs related to that you have to be aware of that you may end up paying when you go to close escrow. And so how much? Well, depends. So let's say that your monthly cost of homeowner's insurance is probably going to be on a $300,000 house. Once again, it depends on what zip code you live in, what area of the country. But a lot of times your insurance will be around $100, $150 a month. Your taxes, once again, vary greatly. Here in Las Vegas area, your taxes are normally going to be about 1%, about 100 or so on a $300,000 house per month. Pretty low. The last thing I'll mention to be aware of is the ongoing costs of purchasing on a monthly basis. Is if you have a homeowner association, which if you're buying a single family home, there's no homeowner association. Sometimes there is, sometimes there isn't. If there is none, then you don't have that cost. But when you buy a condo or a townhome, almost always you're going to have some monthly costs. And I don't have time to get into in this video to get in the details. But for a condo, you're allowed to be looking at $100 to $200 to $225 per month, just in the common cost of owning that condo. That helps to maintain the areas that are owned in common and other repairs and so on that go along with that. So just be aware that there are some costs of home ownership that aren't directly related to paying for the house, and also that go into that you get benefit from, but it has to be paid monthly, and so it will cause some of your monthly costs of home ownership. So just be aware of that. Obviously, you're going to do some research outside of this video, but I just want to make sure you're thinking of that. All right. So, and then the last thing I want to mention, property buying costs or owning costs, is when you hire an agent such as myself. Sometimes those costs can be covered by the seller. Historically, they've been traditionally covered almost completely by seller, but in the year we're in right now, and I'm recording this 2024, we're in the middle of a lot of changes in the industry. There were some even some lawsuits about it, but the way that buyer agents are being compensated is changing. So just be aware. I can't give you the final. This is a fluid situation right now, but as always has been, and even more so now, some are part or possibly all of the buyer agent fees will need to be paid as part of those property costs. And so if you say 5 to 7% is most likely, it is possible you could have another couple percentage points or even 2 or 3% more related to hiring a strong buyer agent, which will usually help you, will protect you obviously, and will also make sure that you're making some of the right decisions. And so that, once again, the things that can be included or covered by the seller are the things like a down payment possibly could be, and there could be some seller concessions, so some of that could be paid. Some of the mortgage costs, some of your money to close the loan can be paid sometimes by the seller. Your buyer agent fees traditionally have been paid more by the seller side of the deal, but just be aware. There's no 100%. That's why it's so important you have an agent that can guide you through, that understands the process and can give you good advice based on your situation, because all of these, anytime you're asking the seller for something, well, there's a reverse reaction, obviously. If your seller's paying for it, that's money that they're not profiting on the sale of the house. And so depending on the market you're in and other factors, there is some real issues there that you need to be aware of. So, okay, so that's the property cost side. The loan cost, now just the cost of getting a loan. So let's just, for this exercise, say that you're putting 5% down and you're doing a loan for just under 300,000. It'd be 200, so 5%, so it'd be 285,000, 15,000 down. Now that's probably could be on the high end, but we're just going to use that so we have some reference. So you're doing a $285,000 loan, and so now the fees that you're looking at that are going to be paid somehow are, I'll go through it real quick and then come back and go through some final scenarios on how it can be included and you don't have to come out all out of pocket for it. And so one of the things, whenever a mortgage loan is created, there's typically an origination fee. The mortgage company and the mortgage lender, the loan officer, they have to make money out of the deal. They have to pay their bills too. And so a rule of thumb, origination fee can often be about 1% of the value of the loan. So you're looking at about just under $3,000 possibly for that cost. Mortgage insurance. Now, I'll mention this again, but this is usually, definitely in the case of, for an FHA loan, the insurance can be included in the loan. And a veteran's loan, it's called a funding fee, and then there's some other costs. They typically can be included and usually are included in the loan, but just realize that it's there. And sometimes they're 1 to 3% of the value of the loan. There is some fees associated there. Definitely some mortgage insurance, definitely 1 to 2%. It can be as much as 3% of the value of the loan. And then another cost to remember is an appraisal. When you go to buy a property, there's usually a $400 to $600 range cost for the appraisal. The lender has to make sure that the property value's there, because the number that they're using to determine how much they're going to lend is based on the value of the property. They're not going to lend, well, it just goes without saying. So, all right. And then the last thing to keep in mind, and I'll come back and recap everything, is the title and escrow. Now, this is different areas of the country. It's different, but in the western part of the United States, you're typically dealing with an escrow company. So there's an escrow fee that's typically split between you and the seller 50-50. And then there's title insurance fees, which make sure that you're getting a property that's free and clear of other liens and encumbrances. And so there's some of that is usually paid, especially when you're putting a loan on the property. There's a part of the title insurance that you have to pay typically as part of the closing costs of doing the deal. And so, I mean, it depends, like I said, on the price of the property, but you're probably looking at $800 to $1,000 or so as your part of that. Now, all of these costs can usually be included, or some of them can be included, just like on the property cost. Sometimes the seller can give a concession, or as we said here, some of them can be included in the price of the loan. But if I was just giving you a number, I would say that you're buying a $300,000 house, you're probably going to want to plan to have, at least $4,000 or so as part of those loan costs. To be safe, and talk to your good mortgage lender. They'll give you a quote right up front. They'll tell you exactly what to expect, so you don't get to closing. They don't want you to get to closing and be surprised and say, I don't have the money. Well, that's going to be a problem. So make sure that you're planning this through. You've talked to competent professionals. But once again, back to what we said originally, if you're buying a $300,000 house, you're probably going to need $15,000 to $20,000 in cash to cover some of all of these costs. And then your ongoing payment, which we'll cover more in another video, but your monthly payment will also include some of these ongoing monthly costs that you need to plan for in your budget. But typically, your costs are not going to be, if they are a little bit more than your rent payments that you're paying now for the same property, the net cost is usually going to be in a similar or less once you figure it all out. So, all right. So I'm running out of steam, but I want to wrap up this video. Hopefully this has been helpful. If you're buying a $300,000 house, you probably want $15,000 to $20,000 in cash to be safe, $21,000, $22,000 or so. But most importantly, talk to a lender, know what you're going to be looking at for loan costs, because that can make a big difference, and that you have them, that you can plan ahead. And it's good to start a year, 18 months ahead, start planning for that. So once again, Lyndon Holdeman, Holden Realty Group. Let me know if I can help you out. Click on the calendar link below. I'd love to chat with you anytime about real estate. Happy to have a chat. And we love working with Gen Zers and first-time home buyers. So let us know how we can help. Happy to have a conversation anytime. Like I said, we're here to help. Lyndon Holdeman, Holden Realty Group.